Sarah Martinez stood at the entrance of Riverside High School, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor as students rushed past her. At 17, she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the faded jeans and oversized sweater that marked her as different from the designer-clad teenagers around her. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her backpack looked like it had seen better days, but her eyes held a determination that few noticed. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows as Sarah made her way to her locker, number 247 in the junior hallway. She kept her head down, hoping to avoid the attention that had made her life miserable for the past 2 years. But luck wasn't on her side today. Well, look who decided to show up again, came a voice that made Sarah's stomach drop. Madison Foster, the queen bee of Riverside High, approached with her usual entourage of followers. Madison's perfectly styled blonde hair bounced as she walked, her designer purse swinging from her manicured fingers. Sarah continued working on her locker combination, pretending she hadn't heard. She had learned long ago that responding only made things worse. But Madison wasn't in the mood to be ignored. "I'm talking to you, charity case," Madison said, her voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby students. "Did you hear what happened yesterday? My dad is thinking about buying that dump you call home." Sarah's hands stilled on her locker handle. She knew Madison's father was Richard Foster, one of the wealthiest real estate developers in the city. The threat wasn't idle. The Foster family had enough money and influence to make anyone's life difficult. "Cat got your tongue?" Madison continued, stepping closer. Her friends giggled behind her, their expensive perfume creating a cloud that made Sarah feel even more out of place. "Maybe you should start looking for a new place to live. Under the bridge might suit someone like you better." The hallway had grown quiet, students stopping to watch the familiar scene unfold. Sarah finally turned around, her brown eyes meeting Madison's cold blue ones. "I'm not bothering anyone," she said quietly. "Just leave me alone." Madison laughed, a sound that was anything but pleasant. "Leave you alone? You bother me just by existing in the same space. This is a good school, not a charity shelter." Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had dealt with bullies before, and she knew that reacting emotionally would only give Madison more ammunition. Instead, she grabbed her books from her locker and started to walk away. But Madison wasn't finished. She stepped in front of Sarah, blocking her path. "Where do you think you're going? We're not done talking." "Please move," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "Please move," Madison mocked, using a whiny voice that made her friends laugh even harder. "What are you going to do if I don't? Call your lawyer? Oh wait, you probably can't afford one." The crowd of students had grown larger, forming a loose circle around the confrontation. Some looked uncomfortable, but none stepped forward to help. Sarah recognized the fear in their eyes, the same fear that kept her quiet most days. Madison Foster was powerful, and crossing her meant social suicide. "My family built this town," Madison continued, her voice growing more aggressive. "My great-grandfather started the first bank here. My grandfather owned half the businesses on Main Street. My father controls more real estate than anyone else in the county. And you? You're nothing. A nobody who doesn't belong here." Sarah's grip tightened on her books, but she said nothing. She had heard variations of this speech before, though never quite so publicly. Madison seemed emboldened by the audience, her cruelty reaching new heights. "I heard your mom works 3 jobs just to keep that pathetic apartment," Madison said, her eyes gleaming with malicious pleasure. "Cleaning offices, waiting tables, stocking shelves. How embarrassing. My mom spends more on a single shopping trip than your family makes in a month." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Her mother did work 3 jobs, and Sarah worked part-time at the local library to help with expenses. But her mother was the strongest, most hard-working person Sarah knew, and hearing her spoken about with such contempt made her blood boil. "Don't talk about my mother," Sarah said, her voice low but firm. Madison's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "Oh, did I hit a nerve? The truth hurts, doesn't it? Your mom probably scrubs toilets for a living while my mom sits on charity boards and hosts fundraisers. We're not the same, Sarah. We'll never be the same." The bell rang, signaling the start of first period, but nobody moved. The tension in the air was thick, and everyone could sense that something bigger was building. Madison seemed to feed off the energy of the crowd, her confidence growing with each passing second. "You know what? I'm tired of pretending you belong here," Madison said, pulling out her phone. "I'm going to call my dad right now and tell him to expedite the purchase of your building. Maybe a nice rent increase will help you understand where you really stand in this world." Sarah watched as Madison's fingers moved across her phone screen, her heart pounding as she realized this wasn't just another empty threat. Madison was serious, and she had the power to follow through. The Foster family owned dozens of properties in the city, and they had a reputation for aggressive business practices. "There," Madison said, holding up her phone to show a text message. "I just told Daddy that the tenants in the Maple Street building are causing problems and need to be dealt with. He'll probably have you evicted by the end of the month." The crowd murmured, some students looking shocked by how far Madison was willing to go. Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. She and her mother had finally found a stable place to live after years of moving from one apartment to another. The thought of losing their home because of a teenage girl's cruelty was almost unbearable. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Madison tilted her head, pretending to consider the question. "Because I can. Because people like you need to learn their place. Because this school, this town, this whole world works better when everyone knows where they belong." She stepped closer to Sarah, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper that only she could hear. "And you belong at the bottom, where all the other trash goes. Don't ever forget that." Sarah stood there, surrounded by dozens of students, but feeling utterly alone. She thought about her mother, who would be devastated to lose their home again. She thought about her dreams of college, which seemed further away with each passing day. She thought about all the times she had stayed quiet, hoping that being invisible would protect her from exactly this kind of situation. But as she looked into Madison's triumphant face, something inside Sarah began to shift. A lifetime of staying silent, of accepting mistreatment, of allowing others to define her worth suddenly, felt like too much to bear. The fear that had kept her quiet for so long was being replaced by something else, a quiet strength that she hadn't known she possessed. Madison must have seen the change in Sarah's expression because her confident smile faltered slightly. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across her face before she recovered her composure. "What's wrong, Charity Case?" Madison said, though her voice lacked some of its earlier confidence. Finally, realizing how powerless you really are. Sarah straightened her shoulders and looked Madison directly in the eye. When she spoke, her voice was calm and clear, cutting through the noise of the hallway like a blade. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," Sarah said quietly. "But you're about to find out." The words hung in the air between them, simple but somehow loaded with promise. Madison laughed, but it sounded forced now, as if she was trying to convince herself as much as her audience. "Is that supposed to be a threat?" Madison asked. "What could you possibly do to me? You're nothing. You have nothing. You are nothing." Sarah didn't respond immediately. Instead, she pulled out her own phone, her fingers moving across the screen with deliberate precision. The hallway fell completely silent as everyone watched, sensing that something significant was happening, but not understanding what. Madison's laughter became more nervous as Sarah continued typing. "What are you doing? Texting your mom for help? Calling your imaginary lawyer?" Sarah finished whatever she was doing on her phone and looked up at Madison with an expression that was completely different from the frightened girl she had been moments before. There was something almost regal about the way she held herself now, as if she had remembered something important about who she was. "I'm not calling my mother," Sarah said softly. "I'm calling my grandfather." Madison snorted. "Your grandfather? What's he going to do? Challenge my dad to a thumb wrestling match?" But some of the students in the crowd were beginning to look uncertain. There was something about Sarah's demeanor that had changed so completely that it was making everyone nervous. Even her closest friends were starting to edge away from Madison, as if they sensed danger approaching. Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming call, and she answered it immediately. "Hello, grandfather," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hallway. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I need your help with something." The person on the other end of the line spoke, and Sarah listened for a moment before responding. "I'm at school, and there's a situation that requires your attention." Yes, I think it's time. Madison was still trying to maintain her confident facade, but cracks were beginning to show. Something about the way Sarah was speaking, the authority in her voice, was making her uncomfortable. I'll send you the details in a text message, Sarah continued into the phone. The family name is Foster. Richard Foster is the father, Madison Foster is the daughter. Yes, that's right. They've been threatening me and my mother. At the mention of her father's name being given to someone on the phone, Madison's face went pale. Who are you calling? She demanded. What are you doing? Sarah ended the call and looked at Madison with something that might have been pity. I gave you a chance to walk away, she said quietly. But you had to push. You had to threaten my mother. You had to try to take away our home. The confidence was draining from Madison's face like water from a broken dam. Around them, students were beginning to whisper among themselves, sensing that the balance of power in the hallway was shifting in ways they didn't understand. You're bluffing, Madison said, but her voice lacked conviction. You're nobody. Your family has no money, no power, no influence. You're just trying to scare me. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message, and she glanced down at it before looking back up at Madison with a small, sad smile. My grandfather says hello, she said softly. He also says that your father's business licenses are about to be very thoroughly investigated. Apparently, there have been some questions about the Foster family's building practices for quite some time. The color drained completely from Madison's face. What are you talking about? Who is your grandfather? Sarah took a step back, creating some distance between herself and Madison's increasingly desperate energy. You spent so much time telling me about your family history, she said quietly. But you never asked about mine. The hallway had become so quiet that the sound of footsteps from the main office could be heard clearly. Someone was coming, and from the rapid pace, it seemed urgent. You see, Sarah continued, her voice carrying the authority that had been hidden beneath years of staying quiet. My mother and I have been living simply by choice, not by necessity. We wanted a normal life, away from the complications that come with our family name. Madison was shaking her head in denial, but her hands were trembling as she clutched her phone. This is impossible. You're lying. You live in that rundown apartment building. Your mother works 3 jobs. I know everything about you. You know what we wanted you to know? Sarah said gently. You know the story we've been telling for the past few years. But stories aren't always the whole truth. The footsteps from the office were getting closer, and now they could hear the murmur of adult voices, urgent and concerned. Madison looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route or someone to help her, but her friends had all backed away, leaving her isolated in the center of the hallway. My real name isn't Sarah Martinez, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the shocked silence of the hallway. It's Sarah Elena Rodriguez Martinez. And my grandfather isn't just anyone. He's Justice Eduardo Rodriguez Martinez of the state Supreme Court. The words hit the assembled students like a thunderbolt. Justice Rodriguez Martinez was one of the most respected and powerful legal figures in the state, known for his unwavering commitment to justice and his particular hatred of corruption in both business and government. Madison's phone slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering onto the floor with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the stunned silence. Around them, students were beginning to understand the magnitude of what had just happened, and many were pulling out their own phones to frantically delete any videos or photos they might have taken. No, Madison whispered, her voice barely audible. This can't be real. You're lying. You have to be lying. But the approaching footsteps had reached them now, and Principal Henderson appeared at the end of the hallway, followed by 2 men in expensive suits who looked like they meant business. Behind them came Madison's father, Richard Foster, his face pale and his usual confident demeanor completely gone. Madison, he called out, his voice tight with panic. Madison, get over here. Now. But Madison couldn't move. She stood frozen in the center of the hallway, staring at Sarah as if she was seeing her for the first time. The girl she had tormented for years, the girl she had dismissed as worthless and powerless, had just revealed herself to be connected to one of the most influential families in the state. Sarah looked at Madison with something that might have been compassion. I really did want to live a normal life, she said softly. I wanted to go to school and make friends and be just another student. But you wouldn't let me. You had to push, and Push until you force me to show you who I really am. The two men in suits had reached them now, and one of them approached Madison with a grim expression. Madison Foster, he asked in a voice that carried the authority of law enforcement. Madison nodded weakly, unable to speak. I'm Agent Thompson from the State Attorney General's office, he said, showing his badge. We need to speak with you and your father about some very serious allegations of harassment, threats, and abuse of power. Richard Foster was trying to push through the crowd of students, his face red with panic and anger. Madison, don't say anything, he shouted. This is all a misunderstanding. We can fix this. But Sarah was already walking away, her head held high and her quiet dignity restored. As she passed the man who had identified himself as Agent Thompson, she paused for just a moment. Thank you for coming so quickly, she said quietly. I know my grandfather appreciates your office's commitment to justice. Agent Thompson nodded respectfully. Of course, Miss Rodriguez-Martinez. Justice Rodriguez-Martinez asked us to handle this situation with the utmost priority. As Sarah disappeared down the hallway toward her first period class, the crowd of students slowly began to disperse, all of them trying to process what they had just witnessed. Madison stood in the center of it all, surrounded by law enforcement officials and facing the complete destruction of everything she had believed about power and social hierarchy. The girl she had dismissed as worthless had just revealed herself to be untouchable, and the family she had thought was beneath her notice had just demonstrated the kind of real power that could destroy lives with a single phone call. In the space of 10 minutes, everything Madison thought she knew about the world had been turned upside down, and there was no going back. The news spread through Riverside High School like wildfire. By lunchtime, every student in the building had heard some version of what had happened in the junior hallway that morning. The story grew and changed with each telling, but the core facts remained the same. Madison Foster had threatened the wrong person, and now both she and her father were facing serious consequences. Sarah sat alone in the library during lunch, as she had every day for the past 2 years. But today felt different. Students kept glancing in her direction, whispering among themselves and trying to catch her eye. Some looked frightened, others curious, and a few appeared to be working up the courage to approach her. Sarah tried to focus on her chemistry homework, but the attention made concentration nearly impossible. Excuse me, came a hesitant voice from beside her table. Sarah looked up to see Jessica Chun, a quiet girl from her English class, standing with a lunch tray in her hands. Would it be okay if I sat here? All the other tables are full. It was a lie, and they both knew it. The library was only half full, with plenty of empty tables. But Sarah recognized the olive branch for what it was and nodded toward the empty chair across from her. Jessica sat down carefully, as if she was afraid Sarah might change her mind and ask her to leave. For several minutes, they sat in comfortable silence, both pretending to focus on their food and homework. Finally, Jessica cleared her throat. I wanted to say thank you, she said quietly, not looking up from her sandwich. Madison and her friends have been making my life miserable since freshman year. What you did this morning, it was incredible. Sarah set down her pencil and studied Jessica's face. She saw the same fear and exhaustion that she had been carrying for years, the same careful way of moving through the world that came from being a target. You don't need to thank me, Sarah said softly. I should have done something sooner. Are you kidding? Jessica looked up with wide eyes. You've been dealing with the same thing I have. Worse, actually. At least Madison mostly just ignores me. She's been actively cruel to you. Before Sarah could respond, another student approached their table. Then another. Within 15 minutes, their quiet corner of the library had become an impromptu gathering place for students who had been living in fear of Madison Foster's social reign of terror. There was Marcus Williams, a sophomore who had been targeted because his clothes came from thrift stores. Emma Rodriguez, no relation to Sarah, despite the shared last name. A junior who had been bullied because of her accent. David Park, a senior who had been tormented because he was openly gay. One by one, they shared their stories of humiliation and fear, creating a picture of systematic cruelty that had been hidden beneath Riverside High's polished exterior. She made me eat lunch in the bathroom for 3 weeks last year, whispered Angela Martinez, a freshman who looked like she might start crying at any moment. Said I smelled like the Mexican restaurant where my mom works, and that I was ruining people's appetites. She started a rumor that I was stealing from other students' lockers, added Marcus, his hands clenched into fists. Her friends would plant things in my backpack and then discover them during class. I got suspended twice before anyone believed me. Sarah listened to each story with growing horror and guilt. She had been so focused on her own survival that she hadn't realized how many other students were suffering. Madison's cruelty wasn't random or personal. It was systematic, targeting anyone she perceived as vulnerable or different. Why didn't anyone report this to the administration? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. David laughed bitterly. Report it to who? Principal Henderson? Madison's dad donates more money to this school than most of our families make in a year. Her mom sits on the school board. The guidance counselors all know the foster family personally. I tried to tell my parents, Emma added, but they said I needed to learn how to fit in better. They were afraid that making waves would hurt my chances of getting into a good college. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of two more unexpected visitors. Tyler Morrison and Chloe Sanders, two of Madison's former inner circle, approached the table with hesitant expressions. The group tensed, expecting another confrontation, but Tyler raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. We're not here to cause trouble, he said quickly. We wanted to apologize. To all of you. Chloe nodded, her usually perfect makeup smudged as if she had been crying. We've been thinking about everything that happened this morning, and we realized how terrible we've been. How terrible we've let Madison be. You didn't just let her, Marcus said angrily. You participated. You laughed when she humiliated people. You helped her spread rumors and lies. Tyler hung his head in shame. You're right. We did. And we don't expect forgiveness. But we wanted you to know that we understand how wrong we were. Madison's not coming back to school, Chloe added quietly. Her dad pulled her out this afternoon. There's talk that they might be leaving town entirely. The group exchanged glances, processing this information. After years of Madison's tyranny, the idea that she might simply disappear felt almost too good to be true. What about the investigation? Sarah asked. Do you know what's happening with that? Tyler and Chloe looked uncomfortable. Our parents have been making a lot of phone calls, Tyler admitted. Apparently, the state attorney general's office is taking this very seriously. Madison's dad's business dealings are being examined, and there might be charges related to the threats against you and your mother. Good, said Jessica firmly, surprising everyone with her vehemence. People like that need to face consequences for their actions. As the lunch period ended and students began to pack up their belongings, Sarah found herself surrounded by people who had been strangers just hours before, but who now felt like allies. The fear and isolation that had defined her high school experience was beginning to lift, replaced by something she hadn't expected, community. But the day was far from over, and Sarah's revelation had set in motion events that would extend far beyond the walls of Riverside High School. That afternoon, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Coming to pick you up early. We need to talk. Sarah found her mother waiting in the school parking lot, her usually calm demeanor replaced by obvious tension. Maria Elena Rodriguez Martinez looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had chosen to live simply but who carried herself with the unconscious authority of someone born to privilege. Get in, her mother said as Sarah approached the car. Your grandfather wants to see us both. Immediately, the drive to the Rodriguez Martinez family estate took 30 minutes, winding through increasingly expensive neighborhoods until they reached the gated community where Sarah's grandfather lived. The contrast between this world and the modest apartment where she and her mother had been living was stark, but it was a contrast Sarah had grown up navigating. Justice Eduardo Rodriguez Martinez was waiting for them in his study, a room lined with law books and legal memorabilia that spoke to a lifetime of fighting for justice. At 78, he was still imposing, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Sarah, he said, rising from behind his massive oak desk to embrace her. I'm proud of you for calling me today, but I wish you had done it sooner. Sarah settled into one of the leather chairs facing his desk, her mother taking the seat beside her. I wanted to handle it myself, grandfather. I thought if I just stayed quiet and ignored them, they would eventually leave me alone. Justice Rodriguez Martinez shook his head. Evil thrives when good people stay quiet, Mija. You know this. We've taught you this your entire life. He moved to the window overlooking his garden, his hands clasped behind his back. I've spent the afternoon reviewing the evidence that Agent Thompson's team has gathered. The Foster family's pattern of intimidation and corruption goes far beyond what happened to you at school. He turned back to face them, his expression grim. Richard Foster has been using his position and wealth to silence anyone who challenges him for years. Tenants who complain about unsafe living conditions find themselves evicted. Small business owners who compete with Foster-owned enterprises face mysterious regulatory problems. Employees who report workplace violations lose their jobs and find themselves unable to find work anywhere else in the city. Sarah's mother leaned forward in her chair. How is that possible? How has no one stopped him? Because until today, no one with real power had been personally targeted, Justice Rodriguez Martinez replied. Foster was careful to only go after people he thought were powerless. People without connections, without resources, without the ability to fight back. He returned to his desk and pulled out a thick folder. But threatening my granddaughter and attempting to have her family evicted was a serious mistake. It gave us the opening we needed to examine his entire operation. Sarah felt a chill as she realized the magnitude of what her confrontation with Madison had unleashed. What's going to happen to them? Richard Foster is facing charges for intimidation, harassment, housing discrimination, and potentially much more as the investigation continues, her grandfather said. His business licenses are being suspended pending a full audit of his practices. The Foster family's reign of terror in this town is over. And Madison? Sarah asked, thinking of the girl who had tormented her for so long. Madison is 17 and was acting under her father's influence, Justice Rodriguez Martinez said carefully. She won't face adult criminal charges, but there will be consequences. The family is leaving Riverside, ostensibly for a fresh start, but really because their reputation here is destroyed. Sarah's mother reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. I know this is a lot to process, Mija. Your whole world is about to change again. What do you mean? Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew. Justice Rodriguez Martinez sat back down behind his desk, his expression becoming more gentle. Your cover is blown, Sarah. By tomorrow, everyone in town will know who you really are. The story is already spreading beyond the school. Local news stations are starting to pick it up. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You and your mother can continue living as you have been, but it will be much more difficult now. People will have expectations. They'll want things from you. Your privacy is gone. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the implications. 4 or 5 years, ever since her father's death, she and her mother had been living quietly, trying to heal from their loss away from the spotlight that came with being part of one of the state's most prominent legal families. Or, her grandfather continued, you can come back to the family. Take your rightful place in our world. Use the platform and resources you've inherited to make a real difference. The room fell silent as Sarah contemplated this choice. On one hand, she had grown to love the simplicity of her life with her mother, the freedom to be just another teenager without the weight of family expectations and public scrutiny. On the other hand, today had shown her what she could accomplish when she stopped hiding and started using her true identity. Can I think about it? She asked finally. Of course, her grandfather said. But don't think too long. The world has a way of making these decisions for us if we wait too long to make them ourselves. As they drove home that evening, Sarah's mother was unusually quiet. Finally, she spoke. I'm sorry, Mija. I know this isn't what you wanted. It's okay, Mom, Sarah replied, watching the familiar streets of their neighborhood pass by. Maybe it's time. Maybe staying hidden was just another form of letting the bullies win. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. The whole school is talking about you. People are saying you're like a real-life princess or something. It's crazy, but also kind of amazing. Thank you again for today. Sarah smiled as she typed back. Not a princess. Just someone who got tired of staying quiet. But even as she wrote the words, she knew that her life as just someone was over. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new expectations, and new opportunities to make a difference. The question was whether she was ready to embrace them. As their car pulled into the parking lot of their modest apartment building, Sarah noticed several news vans parked on the street. Reporters were already gathering, drawn by the story of the hidden heiress who had brought down one of the town's most powerful families. "Looks like the decision might be made for us," her mother observed wryly. Sarah took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. If she was going to be in the spotlight whether she wanted it or not, she might as well use it for good. Madison Foster had taught her an important lesson about power. It could be used to hurt people, or it could be used to protect them. Sarah had spent too many years being hurt. It was time to start protecting others. 6 months later, Sarah stood at the podium of the state capitol building, looking out at an audience of legislators, activists, and reporters. The girl who had once tried to make herself invisible was now speaking to a room full of the most powerful people in the state about a bill she had helped draft, the Student Protection and Anti-Bullying Reform Act. "Bullying isn't just about hurt feelings or teenage drama," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "It's about the systematic abuse of power that teaches young people that might makes right, that wealth and social status matter more than basic human dignity." In the months since the Madison Foster incident, Sarah's life had transformed completely. The story of the hidden heiress who brought down a corrupt businessman had captured national attention, leading to interviews, speaking opportunities, and, most importantly, a platform to advocate for real change. The investigation into Richard Foster's business practices had revealed a web of corruption that extended throughout the city's power structure. 3 city council members had been forced to resign, 2 school board officials were facing charges, and dozens of families who had been quietly victimized over the years were finally getting justice. But Sarah had learned that exposing one bully wasn't enough. The system that had allowed the Foster family to terrorize people with impunity was still largely intact, just waiting for the next powerful family to exploit it. "The bill before you today isn't just about protecting students from harassment," Sarah continued. "It's about creating mandatory reporting systems, ensuring that complaints are investigated by independent authorities, and holding both individuals and institutions accountable when they fail to protect vulnerable people." In the audience, she could see her mother and grandfather, both beaming with pride. Sitting near them was an unexpected group: Jessica, Marcus, Emma, David, and several other students from Riverside High who had become her close friends and allies in the months since that pivotal day in the hallway. The transformation at Riverside High had been remarkable. With the Foster family gone and their enablers exposed, a new culture was slowly emerging. Students who had been silenced for years were finding their voices. The administration, under new leadership after Principal Henderson's resignation, was implementing the kind of anti-bullying programs that actually worked. But perhaps the most surprising development had been the arrival of a letter from Madison Foster herself. The letter had come 3 weeks ago, postmarked from a boarding school in Vermont where Madison was finishing her senior year. Sarah had debated whether to read it, but curiosity had won out. "Dear Sarah," it began, "I know you have every right to ignore this letter, and I wouldn't blame you if you did. I've been in therapy since leaving Riverside, and I'm beginning to understand how terrible my behavior was and how much pain I caused not just to you, but to so many other people. I want you to know that I'm not writing this to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, and I'm not sure I ever will. I'm writing because I think you should know that what happened that day changed my life in ways I'm still discovering. For 17 years, I lived in a bubble where I thought my family's money and influence made us better than other people. I thought being cruel to people I saw as beneath me was not just acceptable, but expected. My parents taught me that the world was divided into those who had power and those who didn't, and that the only thing that mattered was staying on top. When you revealed who you really were, it shattered everything I thought I knew about the world. Here was someone who actually had more power than my family ever dreamed of, but who had been using it to live quietly and humbly instead of lording it over others. It made me realize that true strength isn't about how much you can hurt people, but about how much good you can do. I've been following your advocacy work online, and I wanted you to know that every article I read about your anti-bullying initiatives makes me more ashamed of who I used to be, but also more hopeful about who I might become. I'm starting college next year with plans to study social work. I want to spend my life helping people instead of hurting them. I know it won't erase the damage I've done, but maybe I can prevent other kids from becoming what I was. Thank you for showing me that real power comes from lifting people up, not tearing them down. I hope someday I'll be worthy of calling myself your friend, but until then, I'll be working to become the kind of person who deserves your forgiveness. Sincerely, Madison. Sarah had read the letter 3 times before deciding what to do with it. In the end, she had written back a short note acknowledging Madison's growth and encouraging her to continue on the path toward redemption, but making no promises about friendship or forgiveness. Some wounds took time to heal, and some trust, once broken, had to be rebuilt slowly. Now, as she concluded her remarks at the Capitol and fielded questions from the legislators, Sarah reflected on how much her understanding of justice had evolved. She had learned that holding people accountable for their actions wasn't the same as seeking revenge. True justice meant creating systems that protected the vulnerable and gave everyone, even former bullies, the chance to become better people. After the hearing, Sarah and her family and friends gathered at her grandfather's house for dinner. The formal dining room that had once intimidated her as a child now felt warm and welcoming, filled with the voices of people she cared about discussing their shared vision for a more just world. The committee seemed really receptive to the bill, Jessica was saying. I think we have a real chance of getting it passed. The fact that students were testifying alongside legal experts made a huge impact, added Marcus. When you and Emma talked about your experiences, you could see it hit them on an emotional level. Justice Rodriguez Martinez raised his glass of water in a toast. To my granddaughter, who has taught this old judge that sometimes the most powerful legal argument is simply telling the truth about your own experience. Sarah blushed, but accepted the praise gracefully. I couldn't have done any of this without all of you. And I definitely couldn't have done it while I was still hiding who I was. Her mother smiled. Your father would be so proud of the young woman you've become. He always said that true nobility comes from service, not from titles or wealth. As the evening wound down and their friends headed home, Sarah found herself alone with her grandfather in his study. She had been visiting this room since she was a small child, but tonight it felt different, less like the intimidating office of a powerful judge and more like the workspace of a mentor and partner. I have something for you, Justice Rodriguez Martinez said, pulling an ornate wooden box from his desk drawer. This belonged to your great-grandmother, my mother. She would have wanted you to have it. Inside the box was a simple but elegant necklace with a pendant bearing the family crest. Sarah had seen it in old family photos but had never known its significance. She wore this when she became the first woman to argue a case before the state Supreme Court, her grandfather explained. She said it reminded her that she was carrying not just her own dreams, but the hopes of everyone who had been denied the opportunity she had been given. Sarah lifted the necklace from its velvet-lined box, feeling the weight of history in her hands. What happened to her? She spent her life fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves, her grandfather replied. She took cases that no one else would take, represented clients that no one else would represent, and changed laws that everyone else said couldn't be changed. He paused, studying Sarah's face. But, more importantly, she never forgot that real change happens when you empower others to find their own voices. She didn't just win cases, she mentored young lawyers, funded scholarships for underprivileged students, and created organizations that continued her work long after she was gone. Sarah clasped the necklace around her neck, feeling its cool weight against her skin. Is that what you think I should do? Follow in her footsteps? I think you should follow your own path, her grandfather said gently. But I also think you've already started doing exactly what she would have done. You've taken your pain and transformed it into purpose. You've used your privilege to amplify the voices of people who were being silenced. And, most importantly, you've shown that real strength comes from protecting others, not from protecting yourself. Later that night, Sarah sat in her bedroom. She and her mother had moved back to the family estate after the media attention made their apartment uninhabitable, working on her college applications. She had been accepted to several prestigious universities, but she was leaning toward a state school with an excellent social work program. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Did you see the news? Richard Foster was sentenced to 5 years in prison for corruption and intimidation. His business empire has completely collapsed. Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions at this news. On one hand, she was glad that Foster was being held accountable for his actions and that his victims were finally getting justice. On the other hand, she couldn't help but think about Madison, who was trying so hard to become a better person while dealing with the shame of her father's crimes. She typed back, "Justice served, but I hope his family can find a way to heal and move forward." David's response came quickly, "You're a better person than I am. After everything they put you through, I'm just glad they can't hurt anyone else." Sarah understood his perspective. There had been many nights when anger and resentment had kept her awake, and part of her had wanted nothing more than to see the Foster family suffer the way they had made others suffer. But she had learned that holding on to that anger only hurt herself, and that true victory came not from destroying your enemies, but from creating a world where their cruelty couldn't flourish. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Her mother entered, carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate, a tradition they had maintained even during their years of living simply. "How are you feeling about everything?" her mother asked, settling into the window seat beside Sarah's desk. "Grateful," Sarah replied without hesitation, "and a little overwhelmed. Sometimes I can't believe how much has changed." Her mother smiled. "Do you ever regret not staying hidden? Life would certainly be simpler if you were still just Sarah Martinez from the apartment on Maple Street." Sarah considered the question seriously. There were definitely aspects of her old life that she missed: the anonymity, the freedom to make mistakes without public scrutiny, the ability to form friendships without wondering if people were interested in her or her family's influence. But when she thought about Jessica's confidence as she testified before the legislature, or Marcus's pride as he started a support group for bullied students at his new school, or the dozens of letters she received from young people around the country who said her story had given them the courage to speak up for themselves, she knew she had made the right choice. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. I think I was meant to use my voice, not hide it. I just needed to find the courage to believe that what I had to say mattered." Her mother reached over and squeezed her hand. "Your father used to say that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid but choosing to do the right thing anyway." As Sarah prepared for bed that night, she thought about the girl she had been just 6 months ago, frightened, isolated, convinced that her only option was to endure whatever cruelty came her way. That girl felt like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime. She looked at herself in the mirror, touching the necklace that now rested against her throat. Tomorrow she would continue her work advocating for anti-bullying legislation. Next month she would speak at a national conference about youth empowerment. In the fall, she would start college with plans to study law and social justice. But tonight, she was simply Sarah, a 17-year-old girl who had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop pretending to be powerless. Her phone buzzed one final time before she turned out the light. It was a text from an unknown number. "Hi, Sarah. This is Amanda, a sophomore at Central High. I saw your speech online, and it gave me the courage to report the bullying I've been experiencing. The administration is finally taking it seriously. Thank you for showing me that I don't have to stay silent. You saved my life." Sarah smiled as she typed back, "You saved your own life by finding your voice. I just helped you remember you had one." As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She had started the year as a victim, hiding her true identity and hoping to remain invisible. She was ending it as an advocate, using her real name and leveraging her platform to protect others. Madison Foster had tried to destroy her by threatening everything she thought she cared about. Instead, she had inadvertently given Sarah the greatest gift of all, the realization that she was strong enough to fight back, powerful enough to make a difference, and brave enough to stand up not just for herself, but for everyone who needed someone to stand up for them. The girl who had once been afraid of her own shadow had learned to cast one that could protect others from the darkness. And that, Sarah thought as sleep finally claimed her, was the best kind of transformation of all.